through a couple of slides quite quickly because a couple of people have already mentioned some key points. So I'm going to talk about, is it a natural development of pharmaceutical regulation? I'm rather worried I'm going to fall off this stage. There's a dent in the stage at one point where obviously we all stand. Okay, so the agenda, what were the learnings from the past? It's strange, isn't it? I think it's something about being a scientist. You sort of have to look back before you look forward. Influencing trends, then the regulatory focus, and then the focus on quality maturity model. And what I do want to talk about is some examples of where we've done it. What you find in your bags, actually, please take them away with you. So they've they've got a couple of really nice white papers, one on quality maturity model and one on what Rachel talked about, which was the sort of change in regulatory landscape, as well as a free book and pen. So, the data, if you listen to what Breeder was saying, and you've looked at the information, if you look at the regulatory citations, the FDA really good at actually publishing every year, their findings. And I think the answer is nothing much is changing. We're seeing still lots of frequencies in terms of records and reports, laboratory controls, equipment, and organisation and personnel. So it's more of the same, if you like. I think this data is a little bit misleading in one sense, because obviously just coming out of the pandemic in 2021, you're not going to see as many findings. 2022 is more getting back to, if you like, the norm in terms of regulatory inspections and findings. And then our lovely MHRA, again, they no longer publish the full data. We used to get really nice reports, but it's one of those things where if you haven't got the staff necessarily to do the work, you can't actually publish it. But I suspect nothing much has changed in terms of the quality system always comes out as one of the top findings. I always remember someone saying, if you can't find somewhere to put it, go with chapter 1, because you can always find something in chapter 1 which will talk about the pharmaceutical quality system. Deviation management and investigations, again, they're fairly easy to look at, easy to find problems with them. But those are the most important areas. But what about what's happening now? So we can all think about some of the things Rachel talked about, particularly in terms of data integrity. Think about what do we want? We changed the system name, didn't we, from quality management system to pharmaceutical quality system. Means more or less the same thing. But what do we have to do to have an effective and robust system? If we look back to where the problems have been, I think that tends to inform what the regulators do. So they tend to, if you like, follow. We saw a really good example there in terms of data integrity, which is problems are found, well, it might be time to actually put some more guidance out and to start to enforce the guidance. But what about culture? I'm sure everyone in the room sort of struggles with this in a way, which is, well, how do we measure it? We've already had the questions, how do we measure it? How do we make a difference? And we all understand that it's actually fundamental to the baseline, if you like. If you think about the pyramid, never mind Pete Goff's pyramid, let's think about a different pyramid where you often see one that's got people and processes, but culture comes at the base, and that really informs how things happen in a company. Global supply chains. Paul talked about his, the supply chain maps. I remember sitting in rooms when I happened to be on an ABPI committee and saying, goodness, how are we going to do this? This is really difficult. And how are we going to maintain it? And you're obviously seeing hundreds of examples of supply chains, and it's super difficult to keep them accurate. But again, you rely on the supply chain, you rely on your suppliers, you rely on your contract labs, whatever it is. Practically no company is doing everything in-house now. when I started work over 40 years ago, I dare say, the site I worked at, we made files, we printed tubes, we printed artwork, we had an API site, we had finished product. Hardly any sites like that today. So whether you're relying on your internal company providing you with your active pharmaceutical ingredients, or you're actually contracting it out, it's quite difficult to sort of manage it. I see some very long questionnaires coming from companies. They even send it to companies like us, thinking we're not a manufacturing site, but you get very, very long questionnaires. Do you ever ask questions about quality culture? Don't think so. I think it'd be quite difficult to answer that. We see continued issues with data governance. But the overarching thing we mustn't forget is obviously it's the patient at the end of this. We need good, safe and effective medicines. This is interesting. So Laura Squire is the Chief Quality and Access Officer at the MHRA, so very senior lady. And I actually like this quote. I think, compliance is a behaviour. What does that mean? Behaviour is something that you do when no one else is looking. When I lived in Switzerland, goodness me, you must always walk on the zebra crossings. Whether there was any traffic or not, you followed the rules. You did not cross the road unless the green man was showing, and so on. You didn't drink or eat on the trams, and so on and so forth. But that's the culture of the country. That was what I observed anyway, as a sort of expat living there. But it is something that you notice. So even if you're walking through the town where I lived, which was very quiet at night, everyone crossed the road. And so that's what culture is. And I wonder if that's something that we see in our factories. Do people always follow everything that needs to be done when no one's looking? Trends of today. So if you look at Pharma 4.0, so this was almost around the evolution of, if you like, manufacturing. So Pharma 4.0 is linked to Industry 4.0, so it's about more the digitalization of work. And I'm sure that many, many companies are not yet digitalized in the sense of having data at the touch of a button and so on. Remember working for someone when I'd looked after supplier quality, and he came from Ford, and he was a procurement guy. He was used to pressing the button and getting on his dashboard, this is what our suppliers give. Can't we have that, Lynn? No, sorry. And I'm sure the answer's still, I'm sorry, we can't have it in the pharma industry because it's not connected enough. And I think that's also what Breeder was talking about. Interesting culture. It's about communication and decision making. Talked over the years, we've seen lots around empowerment, trust but verify. You can empower people, but you can only empower people if they actually understand what they're doing, if they're properly educated, that there are some boundaries around what they can and can't do. The other part is around cultural excellence. We've talked a lot about this already. As I say, the ISPE, you can look at it freely on their website. It's very good. It's got some very good questions. You can buy a book all about this for, I don't know, a few $100s. It's not too expensive. But it does talk about culture, but it gives some real practical examples like Gemba. Go to the place of work, see how it's done, talk to the people. Don't assume, talk to the people. And that's good. Integration of operational excellence and cultural excellence. Yeah. How many times do you get into a little bit of a, oh, we want to do this? No, you can't do that but actually if you work together, you can generally find a really good way of making something such that you have simple compliance rather than, almost banging heads about, no, you can't do that. So, again, it's about teamwork and working together. So what this led to, if you like, the ISPE work, and this was really born from the FDA working through their FDA metrics program. I don't know whether, I know some of the companies in the room probably participated in those. And I remember when they first put out the metrics, culture was one of them, if you remember. But then it came back to the question, how do you measure it? How do we measure it consistently across all the sites in our organisation? And then what happened, it became smaller and smaller in terms of the metrics, so that it actually could be actually done consistently across the organisation. But I think that planted a seed in the FDA's mind around, we need to get a handle on culture. And obviously, you need to sustain the maturity that you have with your quality management system or your pharmaceutical quality system. Now, companies downsize, upsize. Just look at what COVID did to some companies. They had to suddenly find hundreds more people to come and work in their sites. Really challenging times, but we sort of rose to that. But you need to have as simple as possible pharmaceutical quality system, such that you can quickly expand or contract if that's also necessary. And so if you've got sustained maturity, you can actually potentially reduce regulatory burden. That's what the regulators are saying. And reduce, more importantly, recalls, and again, product shortages. Product shortages is a real problem. If you went back 10 years, you would never hear it on the news in the UK. Now it's on almost every week, and people are having to, spend a lot of time going to different pharmacies to try and get their prescriptions filled. So, QMM. So why? It's trying to tap into the latest thinking and strategies of the regulatory authorities. Talks about proactive continuous improvement. Continuous improvement's been in the regulations, as Alan said, for years, but it's sort of easy to maybe ignore it, think it's in the too difficult box, but it's there. It needs to be strategic. If you're just a departmental manager trying to sort of bring in quality management maturity, that's difficult. You need senior level management buy-in to it. The quality culture, but it really links to organisational culture. Probably many of you work closely with your safety departments, because if you've got a good quality culture, you've generally got a good safety culture on the same site. It would be very unusual to have one but not the other. And the model, the way it's designed is, every company does not need the same sort of medicine, if you like. It doesn't need the same solutions because they've got maybe different problems. And therefore it can be very flexible. And then it can be client focused, it can be site focused to different clients' needs. We've already seen this. It's really the evolution from current good manufacturing practice up to ICH Q10 and then QMM. And very much it's the FDA who are sort of publishing this and putting out information, speaking at platforms about it. You look at what we have. We've moved from more of a traditional way of assessing quality systems, where you're looking at, has the system been implemented, what are the key performance indicators, audits, inspection, to something that looks rather more complicated. If you just look at that and you sort of break it down and you think, well, how am I going to look at people management? I can't remember the figure Brader used, but it was something like 35% vacancy rate in the USA. So that's difficult. So that would go in the people box, you see? And so you would start to look at things that maybe traditionally as quality professionals we've not looked at. And it also looks at what's the company strategy. And Sam Atkinson calls it the golden thread. And, what's the company strategy and how does that filter down to every single person in the company? So it also looks at analytics and methods, risk management. So it goes right from a sort of strategic to a tactical to operational. And that, many people in this room will have performed audits, I'm sure. that looks very different from how you would sort of structure an audit agenda. If you look at what we've developed, and as I say, this is all in your bags, you need to first understand, well, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Do you want a litmus test about your site or your company or all your sites? What is it? Or is it something that maybe you're just concerned about one particular area and you would like a little bit more help? And then once you've done that, you can really focus in on the assessment. So you can have surveys, on-site visits, interviews. It's really difficult to get the right people to do this, because if you're a Rachel or an Alan who've spent years as people who are used to being very certain about that's right, that's not right, to try and ask very open questions and get answers to try and get to the culture of an organisation. We've had to sort of train our people that it is a bit different from doing a compliance audit. You need to have much more open questions, talk to many different levels in the organisation. So you perform the assessment and then come up with an improvement roadmap. And then ideally go back maybe a year later, and you may just decide to do a survey, not a full assessment again, just to see where the company's improved. When we first developed our model, we assumed that everyone would meet at least a minimum good manufacturing practice. Well, we had to change our model because even though we weren't supposed to be looking for sort of compliance, non-compliance, we found actually there were some quite big gaps in some of the companies we were looking at. So we came up with a regressive stage here where there was, if you like, non-compliance to GMPs. And we're not suggesting for 1 minute people ignore this, they need to tackle it. But that's not fundamentally the reason for a quality management maturity assessment. What I want to do is talk about a case study that we did. So we were asked by a pretty proactive company to, well, can you come and look at our manufacturing sites, two or three very big manufacturing sites, and also corporate quality. So corporate quality, and of course the person commissioning this work was corporate quality, which was great. And so we sent people to the sites. We used the tools that we developed, included documentation reviews and process walkthroughs. And an interesting use of words. We always talk about what's in place, what's in use, but what's in reality, what's really happening there. And also get some very insightful comments from people. And we discovered things like there was a lot of discrimination happening on sites. There was a view of discrimination, perhaps discrimination is probably too strong a word, that one group of people felt that they were being discriminated against others. And so, and there were differences in salaries. So you get into all sorts of HR type issues that are then fed back to the organisation. Luckily, the organisation were pretty open-minded. They had a relatively new chief quality officer, and so he was quite open to the feedback. What was amazing for me was the level of detail in the action plan and how quickly they wanted things to happen. So, okay, we want to change the quality culture. Okay, well, you need some quality objectives. You need what's your quality policy. So all these things were just missing from the company. And how do you start it? And how do you sustain it? So I think my message is you need to have an open mind. In fact, I don't think people would ask for this work to be done unless they were very open to the responses that you might do, and also to put into it any action plans that you need to do, because often these are more difficult actions. You're asking senior management to do things that maybe they've never done before. Do town halls. When you do a town hall, I want you always to talk about quality. I want you always to talk about safety and so on. That's not been the culture of the company. Those are the sorts of steps you can do to actually make things happen. So interesting, I've got to say, as these things are new, you do, whether you're a regulator, whether you're a company like ourselves, you've got to sort of look at your model and tweak it as necessary. And you know, we all learn together. I think we'll see what happens with what the FDA is saying. As I said at the panel discussion before, I think they're a little bit worried about unintended consequences and how they will do it. But we'll wait and see. So that's all I want to say. No, it isn't. It's one more slide. The problem when you present someone else's slides. Yeah, obviously Charles Darwin, very famous person. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one that's the most responsive to change. And that's very true, whether you're 200 years ago or today or tomorrow. So thank you for that, and take any questions in the panel discussion. Thank you.